How do we break the silence on one of society's darkest topics? Jeremy Indika is doing just that, sharing his personal story of childhood sexual abuse to bring awareness, education, and hope. Through his powerful workshops and storytelling, Jeremy is empowering children, teenagers, and adults to understand the realities of abuse and take action to protect the next generation. Today, he joins us to share his journey and discuss how we can all play a role in breaking the silence. If you are caring for someone else, whether paid or unpaid, and no matter how many hours you do it, did you realise that you may be missing out on thousands of pounds of discounts for things that you may use every day? The Able to Care podcast is proud to be sponsored by the UK's #1 carers card. Started by two best friends who recognise that carers deserve better and are 100% committed to helping to change the lives of all carers and bringing them together as a strong community. Carers Card UK provides support, recognition and rewards. It offers reassurance by providing an ID card that helps access emergency information when needed, while also unlocking discounts, a wellbeing hub, a carers circle tool and a community through their app. All of this for less than the price of a box of chocolates a year. There are discounts on gym membership, days out, electrical goods, clothing and even glasses. Let others know you care while taking a little care of yourself with an ID card you can be proud of. Visit carerscarduk.co.uk/promo code/able to care today to order yours. Welcome to the Able to Care podcast, where we explore the stories and insights of those making a difference in the lives of others. Today, I welcome Jeremy Indika, a survivor, storyteller, and advocate who is breaking the silence around childhood sexual abuse. Jeremy has transformed his own experience into a mission, delivering workshops across the country to empower children, teenagers, and adults to understand the realities of grooming and abuse. Through his powerful storytelling and interactive sessions, Jeremy is creating a space for awareness, education, and prevention. In this episode, we'll dive into Jeremy's journey, the challenges he faced, and the hope he's building for future generations. So thank you so much for joining me today, Jeremy. It's genuinely an honour and a pleasure to speak to you. So thank you for giving me your time.
And thank you for that encouraging introduction. I appreciate that a lot.
That's all right. Well, I came across you seeing numerous posts. I think I reached out to you before linking you in with something else. And then I kept seeing these posts and they were so emotive and generally open and a demonstration of vulnerability that I haven't often seen, particularly from maybe it's generalization and maybe it's just because not exposed enough, but from adult males. And that's something that kind of then spoke out to me that, yeah, it's not something we often hear. And it should be kind of spoken about more. So please, would you mind signing off by telling us your story? You know, it's obviously deeply personal and courageous, but what inspired you to start telling your story and being so open about it?
So the sexual abuse that I went through when I was a child was approximately around 8 years old to approximately 10 years old. I was somebody that never showed any signs to anybody. I was highly achieving in class, in school, getting good grades, had great friends, very great in social settings, very confident, very energetic, played all the sports. So wasn't suspecting of anything that had happened behind closed doors. It was very important for me to start realizing, as I started speaking about this more and more in my adulthood, how that wasn't the usual stereotype. The stereotype is that it's the child that is quite obviously showing us signs because they can't make friends or they can't get on with the usual functions in school. They can't achieve in the classroom, etc. And as I saw that being the general consensus and thought patterns of the wider society, I thought, we're really missing something here, because not only am I somebody who didn't show those patterns, but I start to see, as I started doing more research, that actually it's very few people that show those settings. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be observant of those 10 common signs that we look out for example, that are delivered in safeguarding trainings in schools to staff. on courses to foster carers, etc. We must be aware of them. We have to know we have to reach for something, but for us to be like hyper focused on that and then just think that, the well-behaved kid is someone who we don't need to pay attention to, we are then, I believe, missing. We're definitely just missing something there. So once I got into my adulthood and I started speaking out about what happened, which was a journey in itself. We can definitely go into that if you'd like to, as we speak more. And I noticed all of these misconceptions, these stereotypes. That's when I thought, you know what, I could probably do something about this. Wow, what are possibly, that could be thought of as possibly quite an arrogant statement. Like, who did I think I was at that time to think that I could possibly do something about this? I don't know where that kind of energy came from, possibly because I was quite confident in myself at this time. I was 32 years old when I started all of this work. I'd had a successful career in engineering, working all over the world. I was a design engineer. Structural and mechanical. I designed aircraft and supercars. So I was a problem solver by trade, a 15-year career. So I was confident. I was in a fortunate position in my life financially through such a great career that I could stop working temporarily and try to kick something off. And what was that thing? Just to get this subject onto everybody's table. And I still use that phrase today, just to get this subject onto everybody's table. But you're fighting right up against it with that statement because you are trying to get something onto everybody's table that nobody wants on their table. So nobody wants to talk about it. No one wants to think about it. It's horrific on all levels. It's tragic. It's something we hate to think is going on so freely in our communities. So how am I going to get that onto everybody's table? And that's where the creative endeavors that you can see on my YouTube channel, especially if you go to my early videos, where I was trying to make something engaging and thought-provoking, and it's really working.
Yeah, it was quite interesting reading your story. And as you said, there's the typical markers that, I teach safeguarding and therefore I know all those typical markers that we kind of then speak about. But it is such a personal experience for every individual who goes through that situation, that journey, that challenge in life, however it's kind of you want to refer to it. And it was quite interesting that obviously I read within your details that it wasn't until the age of 25 that's when you started to re-experience and recognize that something that had happened in your past was actually impacting on your present, which is really interesting. And I think for so many people, they kind of forget that things like trauma and specifically around things like PTSD, they don't happen immediately. It's a bit like when a person gets out of the car and they start rubbing their neck after a car crash, it's probably not whiplash because that usually kicks in a few days later. And I think it's the same with trauma as well, isn't it? It can be years later before the kind of the symptoms arise in an individual. So talk about that if you wouldn't mind.
So when something happens to you when you're a child that you could never understand fully, it just happened in your environment, to you, around you. Maybe it felt quite normal that happened at your house. Maybe you recognized you didn't like it and it was against the rules, but you didn't want to upset some certain person that was doing it or that was connected to that person. Let's say that actually you were so young that there was no way you had any level of brain development or life experience or maturity to analyze what was going on in your life and that you needed to put a stop to it. Any of those situations, and many, many more, could lead you to continue living after the situation had finished or faded away. And you just move into your teenage years, you move into your young adult years, you move into your adult years. And it's only when you get to a level of maturity that you actually start looking back at it and realizing how wrong it was. Looking back at it and really having the time to think, wow, I can't believe that actually happened, or I can't believe that person did that to me. Now, to lots of people, understandably so, it's very difficult to get your head around this, because when you think about sexual abuse of a child, let's take myself as the example, the 8-year-old, we are only thinking, you know what, we're thinking that it was an attack, or it was forceful, it was physical, it was violent. Whenever you think about sexual abuse of a child, you think about some adult pinning the child down, doing things to them, and the child kicking and screaming, "Get off me." It's a lot more complicated than that. And, these situations are often not violent, forceful, a physical presence towards them. They're very coercive and manipulative, and there's a high level of grooming that's happening. The child may feel obliged to do this thing. The child may actually seek something within it. Care and attention may be something. There may be some kind of exchange, which is not a good one, but is happening. So it's very, very complicated. And people often, it's only when they get into their adulthood that they have even the capacity to have a think about this and say, hang on a minute, I'm not happy about that. And so maybe I'll say something. And unfortunately, lots of people get shut down with, well, if it's taken you this long to say something, then it couldn't have been that bad. And, to confuse the matter even more, maybe at the time it wasn't that bad. Right? Maybe at the time it was, it maybe made you feel uncomfortable, but, this person would touch you in a certain area. This person would ask you to do certain things. It would just happen now and again. You just got on with it because that was just what life was at that time. You were 10 years old and it just whatever. But now actually you're like, hey, hang on a minute. I'm not standing for that. That was wrong. And so that's when you get people coming forward and calling people out. And there's got to be great analogies that we can use. I mean, the one that you used there of the whiplash is a good one, because otherwise people are not going to be able to understand this. Very few children come forward at the time. Very few.
Mm. Yeah. There's a couple of really important points that I think you mentioned there, Jeremy. One of them is for some children that I've supported, worked with, encountered, there is such a sense of shame and guilt they sometimes experience later in life because it wasn't the attack and defense kind of scenario that most people paint it as. And they may have actively sought out the abuse at times because they were children, because they felt special from it in some way, or they got some level of gratification, validation, or even it kind of felt nice, which is so controversial to anybody to be able to say. But if something feels nice, you're going to seek it out. But it is until later in life you realize that wasn't okay, that the adult was coercing and using a child against their true understanding. But that's going to create very complex situations.
Right. So I have a example that we can use that covers all of what you just said. So back in 2018, 2019, I'd been speaking out about my story for, 4 or 5 years by that point. I gained so much confidence through telling my story in my adulthood to close friends at that time. I had also tried to prosecute the man that did this to me. So I'd been on quite a journey by this point. I thought to myself, I would love others to have the opportunity to experience that empowerment and that growth through telling your story that I experienced. So I launched a platform called Something to Say. It started on Instagram, and it was a platform where I said to my following, which was tiny at that point, it was basically just my friends and family and a few other people that found my work at that stage. And I said, look, if anybody's got a story and they want to tell it, I've started this platform where you can come and speak. So the story that is full of information is Jenny's. She was the first person to share her story on our YouTube channel. She's followed my work since she was probably one of the early people who I didn't know. She's from another country. So I don't know her. Her story is brilliant in the way that it can summarize everything. It can help people understand what me and you have just been talking about. So she was 12 years old, and the person who was exploiting her was 19 years old. So, in all the countries that I'm aware of in the Western side of the world, that's illegal, first of all. From a human level, it's immoral. From a legal point of view, it's illegal because we say that here in the UK, any child under the age of 16 cannot give consent to sexual activity. They're not mature enough. We don't give them that thing. We don't allow them to do that. So the responsibility is on the adult to not go there with that young person. So Jenny was 12 years old. This 19-year-old knew her through the community and started to send her messages, attention, affirmation, praise. You're so pretty. I think you're so special, but we could never do anything. You're that young. And Jenny explained so brilliantly in her video that she just couldn't believe that this boy was just showing her attention. And she even messaged him back saying, "Why me?" And he gave a good answer to keep her hooked in. And then they started interacting in a sexual way, physically in person as well as through text message. And he would always do things to her, and he would say to her, "Look how much I love you. I don't make you do things to me because I know you're not ready for that yet," until that started. And she genuinely thought she was in a loving relationship that would last forever. And I'm pretty sure any female that's listening to this can really understand how easily that could happen. Like that wouldn't be a difficult thing to groom a 12-year-old in that scenario, especially as the older boy was like quite well thought of within the social circles that they were both in. So he already had this position of power. So Jenny gets into her mid-20s, I believe it was her mid-20s, and she starts looking back at that and she's like, hang on a minute, all of that was wrong. All of that was wrong. But the emotions of shame and guilt, which I know is very difficult for people to even understand, Jenny, she didn't mention this in her video, but I'm quite sure that Jenny would have gone through some kind of process of feeling shame and guilt because she was messaging him back. Maybe even she was inviting him over when her parents were out. So she'll feel some complex because she was kind of, in inverted commas, participating in this situation. And maybe even initiating it in some times. But that none of that matters. The law is the law, and what we say as we say as a community is what we say. But now we can really understand, everything that we were saying about the child, which Jenny was, could have enjoyed the sexual abuse because that's what it is, where an adult has coerced, manipulated and exploited a child for their sexual arousal. But the child didn't see anything wrong with it at the time. But then in adulthood, on later reflection, sees something wrong with it. Very complex, but put in the right way, we can understand it.
Yeah, that's a powerful story, and I think there's one that, many people who feel comfortable able to listen to this can probably relate to quite significantly. One thing that kind of struck me as you were telling that, and I know there is a bit of a discord, and maybe why I kind of picked out from youth in the crowd and the fact of being a male telling your story as well, is that obviously there's still a bit of a difference in perception when it's the other way around as far as genders. I think, 19, 20, early 20-year-old, let's say a 20-year-old, mid-20 teacher is engaging with sexual behavior with a 12-year-old girl, sexual abuse with a 12-year-old girl. But if you switch that around, there's still this complete difference in perspective that happens as a result of that. Have you found that from the people that you've met? Does that, does it seem to affect how it impacts on victims in the way that they experience it?
So if we're talking about the female perpetrator and the younger boy, I only, off the top of my head, only know one person that's speaking out about that.
Yeah.
And I know quite a few people that are making a lot of noise in this space because I've been in it now for 6 years. And there's only one. And fair play to him, because, you know, not only are you fighting against, you know, you're fighting against the society in a completely different way, you know, because, you know, you get the very laddish response of, cool, I wish that had happened to me, you know, a 20-year-old female that touched the 14-year-old boy. And it's complicated because at 14 years old, I was very promiscuous. And if a 20-year-old female approached me, I'd be receiving that definitely. Right. So just as a general society construct, we don't see it as exploitative like we see a 20-year-old male on a 14-year-old girl. It is a completely different dynamic, but it actually is a different dynamic. You know, they're both wrong, right? They're both equally wrong, but there is a different dynamic because it's a female and a male is very different to a male and a female, but we still have rules. Right? We still have rules, but these people who have been offended against females, I mean, no one's coming forward with that because they won't get taken seriously. But that's why the platforms I've generated are so powerful, because it is a space for those to come forward if they wish to. Now, when it comes to male victims, we're not like, we are definitely in a situation where culture is changing, for sure. I mean, 30 years ago, you just wouldn't even bother saying anything about any of this, whether you're a female or a male, probably. But you know, the space is here now. Things are definitely changing, but there's definitely a real resistance as a male to come forward, especially if you've been sexually exploited by another male. Really difficult. I was just about to say, especially if you're heterosexual, maybe especially if you're heterosexual. That's my situation, so that's what I know. But if you were homosexual, maybe it would still be terrible to talk about it. I'm not sure. But yeah, I mean, why, if I take my personal journey, why was it so challenging coming forward the first few times I did it? You know, there's definitely an embarrassment there. It feels embarrassing. I think that's kind of a good word to summarize it. Possibly it feels weak. You know, it's not nothing to show off about. you know, it's not like, oh, I was doing this stunt on my bike and I broke my leg in 3 places, and you know, it's not really a story to tell. Yeah. It's not like a tragic story it's like a war story. You know what I mean? It's not actually a war story, but you know, like, you know, when I was at school, I used to love stunt biking, and I did a flip and I broke my leg in 3 places, and that's why I walk like this today. Like that's like a war story, let's call it. I don't know if that's the right phrase, but you can tell that with some confidence. You tell that at dinner table, or like, you know, it's a story you like to tell because it's got some, I don't know, some affirmation with it. But this, no, because you've been tricked and you're a child. Yeah. So we understand that, but you know, when it's you, it's not easy to kind of get your head around that. You were tricked. You were taken. This is not the correct phrase, by the way, but it let's say one of the emotions I was feeling was like, you got taken for a fool. And you thought it was all good, and you thought you were part of it, and you thought, you know, you even enticed it a few times because you were so tricked. Now, I feel optimistic that kids these days are a lot more equipped to recognize the red flags of grooming, or that they're being offended against, because we are teaching children about the boundaries on their body from 5 years old. You know, and we're teaching them that every single year. In fact, when I speak in schools, I deliver sessions in schools to year 7 and above. So that's ages 11 and above. One of the things I open with, just to I don't know, maybe it's just a way of trying to get everybody engaged. I tell them what the session's going to be like. I tell them what it's not going to be like. So I say, this is not going to be like your usual PSHE lesson. I'm going to do something different because give me a nod if you've been taught a million times about body boundaries. And they're all like, yeah. Give me a nod if you've been taught a million times. And I really emphasize it about consent. And they're all like, yeah. And then I say, and tell me, give me a nod if you are fed up with that conversation. And they're all like, yes. Now I do that. That's a technique that I'm using just to try to, connect with them. Like, I'm not a teacher. Don't worry about it. Like, this is going to be cool. But their response is true. Right. By the time they get to year 7, by the time they get to year 11, oh my goodness, they just can't deal with the conversation. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing. I was sexually abused in 1993. None of that was happening. None of that was happening. So things have changed. We can be optimistic about these things, but lots of work to be done.
Yeah, I think there's elements of that obviously are really positive as far as teaching children about appropriate boundaries and things like that. And I think, from everything from the Pantysaurus kind of videos all the way through. And I think there is statistics showing that younger people are engaging in less sexual activity and things like that at a younger age. They are waiting and holding on. And I've met some, in some ways, particularly females as well, seem to have really got some good boundaries in place, going, I'm not doing any of that until I'm older, which is really positive to hear. But I think the vulnerability of that, though, on the flip side, is that sometimes it's like, I know how to cross the road safely so I'll never get hit by a car. That they're actually, in one way, that increases vulnerability because it's almost like, well, it can't happen to me because I know all this body boundary stuff. And I know what consent is and that kind of stuff. So that, in one way, almost leads them vulnerable in different ways. In not the same way it was before, but leads them in vulnerable in different ways that they think they can't be groomed. They can't be manipulated. And I think that's maybe a misunderstanding that most adults are non-abusers, but they're not necessarily protectors. And it is kind of looking out for that. It's easy to be a non-abusing adult. It's much harder and more active to be a protecting adult and kind of watching out for the kind of the signs and the warning indicators and going past that. I know you think you know, but there is a difference in how an adult can potentially manipulate a situation, and it's that emotional, social maturity that it still leaves them incredibly vulnerable, I would say.
Interesting point. Yes. And we've educated them so well now that they're probably arrogant, that have arrogance that this could never ever happen to them. So maybe they're a bit more blasé about it. That's so true. I've never really thought about that before. And of course, something we didn't have in 1993 was the online space. So it's completely opened up the world to anyone that wanted to offend against a minor. It's in some respect like phenomenal how much it's opened it up. Somebody who wanted to find a child to exploit or a teenager to exploit can do that just so easily now. Whereas before you would have to have in-person interaction and you would have family unit around that child or teenager to have to get past before you actually got to the teenager. So yeah, I mean, the whole situation has changed. So there are pros and cons. I mean, sort of things to feel pessimistic about is definitely that internet space because, everything's become so sexualized. I don't know whether you've seen, some of the music videos these days would have been considered soft porn back in the day. And they're just normal. You could see some musicians' Instagrams grids are like what Playboy used to be. Do you know what I mean? Back in the day, and you've got 15-year-old girls following those older people, and yeah, I mean, we could really start thinking about the difficulties of today's modern world. But, one of the facts is that you're not going to get these children offline. That's just unrealistic. And that's not even the way the world is going. We're going more technology, not less. I know that some schools actually just work on iPads now. There's no actual pen. So like going down that road. So as parents, we want to know, like, what is the best thing that we can do moving forward? It is definitely continuous open conversations. Don't be shy about it. Speak to them on a level, be curious, and try your best to be someone that they would come to if they were ever in any danger.
Have you ever encountered an adult or child's behaviour that has felt difficult, overwhelming, or challenging? Have you sometimes felt at a loss of what to do, or know that you didn't handle it quite right? People are complex and unpredictable, and their behaviour can be like the weather. We've all made the mistake of looking out the window and feeling safe to wear shorts, but 5 minutes later wishing for an umbrella. But what if, like a weatherman, you understood how humidity, temperature and pressure all come together to cause the weather, allowing you to better prepare, predict and respond, and prevent ever having a picnic ruined by a thunderstorm ever again? My book, called Targeting the Positive with Behaviours that Challenge, helps you to become the weatherman of behaviour. It provides you with a toolkit to increase competency, confidence, resilience and empathy, so you feel more assured about how to respond to distressed or dysregulated behaviours in others, including those affected by trauma, mental health, neurodiversity, learning disabilities or dementia. Build better connections, achieve de-escalation and improve outcomes for yourself and those you engage with my celebrated 6-stage target model, a step-by-step process to reduce distress for everyone. Discover my empowering, person-centered guide in Targeting the Positive, written by me, Andy Baker, available from online bookstores worldwide. Find a link in the description and order today. So you've been through a journey, obviously, with your confronting your abuser, if you're okay to talk about that for a minute, because that's a big part of the story. As far as this obviously started to affect you at that later age.
Yeah.
You tried to then raise it. You tried to then prosecute and take him to court or get the police involved. And I think although you were taken seriously, from what I can gather from the story, and please correct me if I'm wrong, unfortunately it didn't go anywhere, lack of evidence. And so you kind of then took it on yourself to kind of go down a journey of trying to find this opportunity to confront. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I feel like this was something that I did where I was so angry and upset and feeling like, where do I go from here? Once the police told me that I couldn't prosecute him through the usual channels. And I know that we are so frustrated at that always being the result. There are statistics flying around on how many prosecutions, percentage-wise, are ever accomplished with these historic sexual abuse cases. I've heard like 1-2% being flying around. And mine falls into the bracket that couldn't make it. And we also have to accept that it's just the case that there isn't any evidence, because there really isn't any evidence. There's no record of any interaction, right? There isn't even there is record. There's a couple of photographs that we've got of him at our house. He was a trusted. He wasn't a trusted member of the family, but he was a trusted adult within my parents' circles. And so there's evidence that he was at the house, but I mean, that's not evidence that any sexual abuse took place. There's no record of any conversation between me and him, because, I mentioned we weren't in the electronic age then. Possibly there could have been a text message if we were talking in today's terms, or some kind of recording, a video recording on a mobile phone, but, none of that was around. So we don't have it. I didn't have any evidence. So the case can't be taken to court. And just to finish off on that particular point, we wouldn't want it any other way, because we wouldn't want a system where people were going to prison because somebody said something about them. You have to prove it. And that kind of realization, or that kind of peace that gives me, is come to me in the last couple of years only. Because at the time I was just furious about it. Everybody that I told up until that point, I reported when I was 32. I told someone for the first time when I was 27. Memories came back at 25. So there's a little bit of timeline for you. So at 32, it just absolutely infuriated me that we couldn't do anything about this. The police had interviewed everybody that I'd spoken to in that 5 years. By this point, I told my parents too. And I told all of my close friends. I'd quit my job, engineering, and decided to start pushing this subject online. I started speaking at open mic nights, was a way of me speaking to live audiences. I sold everything that I had. I dedicated my life to this, and but none of that's still not evidence. The fact that I told a friend is not evidence. So you have to just accept that. But I couldn't accept that. And so I spent some months with this in my head, and on the open mic stages, especially around London, I was talking this story, saying that the police prosecution attempt had failed, and I felt like this about it. And it was a real place for me to express the emotions. It was good. It was very good. But I still wanted to confront him about what had happened. I still feel like today that we shouldn't, these people are not people to be feared. The media portrays them to be some dangerous criminals. They are dangerous as a matter of fact. Technically they are dangerous to children, but we don't need to be afraid of them, right? Mostly they are insecure, weak, lonely, not necessarily lonely, because that dives into that stereotype, but they're weak and insecure, mostly men. And they should be confronted for what they did. That's how I felt. And so I managed to find out where he lived, and I went and knocked on his door. Now, this was a decision that I was advised against by my friends. What's going to happen when you see him? You haven't actually seen him for 25 years. Not 25 years, finished at 10 years old, 32 by this point, 22 years. How do you know this isn't going to get out of control? They were all like, you shouldn't do this. But my response to them was, I would be very surprised if I lost my cool. And that was enough for me. And I wasn't listening to what people were saying about this situation at that point anyway. So I just went and knocked on his door. Now, look, you could spend an hour talking about describing everything that happened at that door that day, because he answered, which was some phenomenal luck, really, when I think about it. Anybody could have answered. He could have not been home. He had family, 2 daughters, wife. So anybody could have answered, but it was actually him. So we had a verbal, heated conversation at the door. I was holding the door open. He was trying to push it shut. His wife was in the background calling the police. And the police arrived, they arrested me. And this man and his wife prosecuted me. They pressed charges. So they had grounds to press charges. You may be wondering what they were. Stalking for finding out where he lived, harassment for the times over the years I'd messaged him, and messaged his wife asking to meet him in person. That was obviously before my prosecution attempt. His no reply and his blocking of my messages was what really initiated me to call the police in the early stages of this. But yeah, I went to magistrate's court. I pleaded not guilty. The court day was, you could make a film about this, honestly. That was an intense day. Everybody was there. We were all 10 meters away from each other. I stood in the dock and answered the questions strong and proud to be there. Because before I went there in the morning, I thought to myself, do you know what? This isn't only about you. I just felt like, and by this point, my following had kind of started to grow. I had more people on my platforms that didn't know me, right? That's, in my experience, you're starting to gain some traction when people from different countries press the follow button. So it was like I was standing there for everyone that would never have a chance to confront, to stand in the face of who did this to them. And I wanted to stand strong. And the result was not guilty for the stalking harassment. And thank goodness for that, because that would have come with a 6-month prison sentence. That is crime that's taken very seriously in this country. I was found guilty for assault because I actually left a red mark on his chest when I pushed the door open. And I got a criminal record. So that's now on my DBS check. So when I go into schools, it's always just an unfortunate conversation I have to have with them. You know, we've got, they're interested. They've seen me on mostly LinkedIn. These bookings come from, they've checked my website out and they're excited and they've read my testimonials and, people are saying great things about my sessions. And then, you know, then I have to approach this topic of, just to let you know, I haven't got a clean DBS check. And on my DBS check, they've labeled it as battery, which sounds so horrendous for what it was.
Does, yeah.
And so I have to explain the whole thing. And I know then, you know, people are already nervous when they book me because of the subject matter, but they're going off word of mouth or testimonials. It makes them even more nervous. Like, I don't need that. But it's working out okay.
Yeah, battery is a strange term, isn't it? It's obviously the definition is a use of unlawful force against a person. So you don't even need to cause any physical harm. If you cause significant physical harm, that'd be ABH, and if it was then obviously grievous bodily harm. But battery is the lowest form of assault, but it sounds really bad.
It sounds like you've beaten them to the floor.
Absolutely, I mean? Yeah, it's got that term. Yeah, but that's lowest form of. So if you got common assault. And battery and assault are two separate terms. So battery is a use of force. Assault is verbal. So a threat of imminent force.
Okay.
So no, you got the lightest you could have gone. So I don't know whether that helped when you're going into schools. Kind of it's the lowest.
It's interesting because a few people who I've mentioned this to, they've been like, "Oh, it'd be so good when you can get that off your record." And I'm like, "You can't get that off your DBS check. No. Like, why we would never?" They're like, "Oh, that's so unfair." And I'm like, "No." Again, we wouldn't want it any other way.
Yes.
You don't want people being able to take convictions off their DBS check. So that will live on there forever.
I think there's a few things I really liked in what you said there, Jeremy. One is that you seem to have this massive level of self-awareness. As you said, it's looking at it from I know how I feel and what I would like. But that if that worked and everybody was able to then just do what they wanted and did what they liked, then that would then have a negative impact on society. Like yes, I want him to go to prison and but there was no evidence. If there's no evidence, if we put anybody to prison who didn't have evidence for, then I could be in prison, you could be in prison because if somebody doesn't like us on one day. Yeah. So what I would say is that I think even though obviously you've gone through a journey and it didn't work out the way you wanted to, I was involved in a situation with a friend of mine who came and was struggling, similar to yourself, started to have episodes of remembering things that have happened to her when she was 11, related to a family member, but by marriage, not by blood. And we went through the process. I sat with them calling the RPCC and things like that, the NFPCC, sorry, and we managed to, he ended up going to prison for a few years. But even though she managed to get that and it managed to get all the evidence that was required, she still didn't feel okay about it. It's still something that haunts her and affects her and stuff like that. So I think although it's still worth, making that decision, do I want to take this forwards and do I want to make the prosecution? Don't not do it because you think it might not. If you feel it's something you want to do, but at the same time, it may not be what you need to feel better. And I think by the sounds of it, that confrontation is something you needed to do. To stand in the face of I'm not scared of you almost. Show that you are the adult you are now, not the child that it happened to, which I think is a big thing. And I think that's the thing for her as well. And she'll never get that opportunity, I don't think.
I think that's common amongst people who even have the joy of like a successful prosecution, like afterwards. That doesn't change what happened. Yeah, what happened is still there and it's untouched. Like the prosecution didn't lessen anything to do with the situation. But what the prosecution did do was put somebody on the sex offenders register for the rest of their life. What it did do was make them serve a prison sentence and go through some form of process that they have for sex offenders in prison. What it did do was make sure that the society or the job roles that they go for will be aware of this conviction, because the prosecution attempt isn't just for the person that it happened to. The prosecution attempt is for today's generation.
Yeah, it's the difference between justice and vengeance, isn't it? As far as, we need to make this right. We need safety. We need justice. You know, this person shouldn't be on the street and be able to ever do it to anybody again. But if you're doing it from a point of revenge or vengeance, that won't bring the validation that I think most people are hoping for. I had an amazing interview with somebody you may know of or may have heard of, a guy called Jeff Thompson, who talks about his journey for forgiveness, where he confronts his abuser and says, "I forgive you." How do you feel about that concept? Because I know I've spoken to other individuals who have been abused and they don't accept forgiveness. They don't like that as a concept at all. Some people are not worthy of forgiveness is what I've had from people's mouths. I wondered what your perspective.
What would you say the explanation of forgive is?
That's it. I think there's a little bit of semantics there, isn't there? So I would say that Jeff Thompson refers to it as well. Is a big part of forgiving himself was part of that journey. But anger, one of my definitions, and this is where I've had disagreements with people. I love this definition. Anger is the emotion you give. Anger is the emotion you punish yourself with for other people's behavior. So there's an element of because me being angry, me feeling upset, essentially they could be walking around not caring the world. So I'm the only one who's then punishing myself, which means that they still have power over me at that point. They're still impacting on my life. They're still still affecting it. So obviously this isn't related to any sexual abuse. I was mugged at knife point when I was 16 and I've served the guy a pint later on in life and kind of, although it emotionally affected me, I feel no animosity towards him because I've let go and gone, hey, I don't know. It doesn't make him a good person. I don't know what he was going through, what's happened to him. I don't know his journey or anything about him. But I will not ever allow him to have power over me ever again. And the way to do that is going, no, he's not important to me anymore. And I think I know not everybody can do that. And I know that I'm not necessarily speaking for everybody that they should do that. But yeah, I just wondered your perspective.
Yeah, so the forgive definition that I just Googled is stop feeling angry or resentful towards someone for an offense, flaw, or mistake. So I feel like towards this man, there will always be an anger towards him. There will always be frustration towards what he decided in those days that was okay to do. And I'm almost fearful of letting that go because it's the most incredible driver for action. Because if everyone who's ever been sexually abused in their childhood just forgets about it and forgives the person that did it, nothing will ever change because we will just keep that, and this is no criticism to anybody that wants to forgive and forget. If that's where you're going with it, go ahead, as long as that's the correct decision for you. But if everybody did that, there'll never be any change. And generations upon generations will just continue with no prosecutions, no laws changed, no education system changes. Because essentially, if we can get the laws changed and get society to take this with the seriousness that it should, due to the effects of sexual abuse on people's lives, then eventually it feeds into the education system, and it will be mandatory to talk about harmful sexual behaviours, so we can actually educate mostly the boys about what you don't want to become and how you don't want to behave. And so there's like change on all levels. And if I just decided that actually I don't want this to affect my mental state ever again and went down that road, for me personally, then there's no action. I will never take action because I'm not settled with the man that did this, because he's out there with no one monitoring what he's doing in person and online. And some people may be like, oh, Jeremy, this is just holding you down. But if you're a parent and your child is the next person that he grooms and exploits, you will be wondering why I forgot about it and let it go. Then it changes, because when it's in your circle, it changes, right? So his wife is a primary school teacher, right? So that should scare you immediately. He's a nurse working in the NHS. That should scare you immediately, right? No one's monitoring his online activity. That should scare you immediately. And those discomfort feelings, which I sit with often, I have to, like, we're men in this situation and we need to do something about this, right? We need to do something about this. The statistic from the latest statistic released from the government on the National Crime Agency, released in 2023, is 15% of girls and 5% of boys. So that is 15 out of every 100 girls and 5 out of every 100 boys will go through a situation of sexual exploitation or abuse in person, whether that be actual physical touch, whether that be bombarded with explicit material, whether that be enticed to exchange nudes, whether that be any type of sexual engagement on any level before the age of 16. So in year 11, which is our last school year in this country, if there's 200 in that year group, which on average it kind of is 180, 190, but let's say 200, 30 of those girls would have had some form of indecent activity on their table at some point in their life. 30 of those girls. Mostly by men, right? What is it? 98% of all sex offences are committed by men. And the boys, there'll be 10 boys there. And I think for the boys, it is a different situation because they are mostly targeted by organised crimes where they're enticed to do something. And then once they've done that thing, that those people have them hooked in and they have to do more things. Just a small example. We call that sextortion. They're targeted in different ways, right? They're targeted by illegal pornography websites. They're targeted by people trying to make money out of them. But the girls are targeted in different ways. So, like, we need to do something about this, right? Unless you think a 30-year-old man on a 12-year-old girl is okay. No one wants that in their family. Like, it's horrific. It can lead to severe mental illness, emotional dysregulation, huge life issues, trust issues, relationship issues, higher rates of suicide. It's really something we need to sort out. And I think it's about time that we actually did something about it.
That's a great response as far as the I say it's almost if we're looking at it purely from a self-wellbeing point of view, then maybe it is better to forget that anger. But as you said, if everybody does that, then it doesn't create a driver. You know, sometimes anger is passion. I suppose it's whether it's driven into a constructive or a destructive way. And if you can make it constructive, then, you know, passion, anger is something that can really drive to make change and obviously be an activist within that. If it becomes destructive, then that's where, you know, the individual needs to decide which of these is going to be. And if it's going to take me down that destructive route, then I need to let go of it. If it's going to take me down the constructive route where I can add service. You know, I have an acronym GPS: gratitude, perspective, and service. So anything bad we can take and we can put into those three somewhere. What can I be grateful for that I've learned so much? I've overcome it and I've beaten it. Perspective. You know, it happened in my past. It will never happen to me again. And the service, I'll make sure that nobody else will do this to any other child again if I can help it. And driving forwards with that, turning that something bad into something constructive, I think's really positive.
I just want to add one more point to it, because I know that, like, what I'm not trying to imply is that everybody that's been sexually abused that feels the desire to go and, like, change the world. I'm even saying, like, if you're a parent, right, and you've always got that little bit about the person that did it to you in your mind, and you've never really managed to ever let it go. It's not something you want to do, is let it go. That little piece of anger and frustration that's always a little baseline inside of you would always make you high alert and encouraged to speak with your children all the time and be interested in what they're doing and where they've gone and what happened when they went out somewhere, and to, it's a driver for great things. It doesn't have to be on like some crazy activist level. It can just be in your own family.
Well, we're kind of reaching towards the end of the session. It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you. It's generally like I can see why your following is growing and you're gathering more attention, because I see, the passion and eloquency with which you speak and the openness and vulnerability which you speak is genuinely a force for good, in my opinion. So obviously we'll make sure that there's details of how people can find you. I thought the website was fantastic, by the way, as far as going through that. Loads of videos on there that you've dramatized some of the stuff you've gone through, which is really easy to connect to and relate to. So I'll be directing people that way from some of the training courses I do as well. So,
right.
But yeah, no, fantastic. And thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I know obviously you're a busy man building this this vision that you have as far as improving the quality of life for people. So yeah, my pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I appreciate the conversation too. And I know you'll put all my website and things in the show notes if people want to find me or message me. And like I just say to people, like, come along for the journey. Like we're constantly building layers upon these projects. It's really exciting. We're always learning, and we're very open about that on our social media too. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes I make mistakes. But like we're always throwing out questions, seeing what the community are saying. And I really believe we'll go somewhere with this. I think it's going to be incredible. So come join the journey. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you. And it circles it back to what you said at the beginning, is trying to get it on people's table, even if that feels uncomfortable. But it's just, the more we speak about it, the less uncomfortable it becomes for people and victims to come forward. So,
right.
So obviously for our listeners and watchers of the episode, obviously it has been emotive and there is some subjects that some people find really difficult. If you felt affected by this, we'll make sure we put some details in the show notes of where you can go to get some additional support. But do reach out to Jeremy as well. And if anything that you felt was important, please like, comment and share and pass this on to others. But otherwise, thank you very much for listening.
Let me ask you a question. Do you ever find the pressures of supporting, teaching, or caring for someone else overwhelming and wish you had access to more support and information? The Able to Care podcast, in connection with Able Training, has created the ablehub.uk, where for less than the price of a coffee a week, you can access exclusive podcast content, resources, events, and over 45 certified online courses, covering topics like self-care, understanding dementia, neurodiversity, first aid, conflict management, financial advice, and so much more, with new content and courses being added each month. We are so confident that you will benefit from the Able Hub that we are offering 14 days access completely free of charge. No contract, cancel anytime. Become part of the ablehub.uk community and gain the support, knowledge, and resources you deserve. Don't struggle alone. Be able. Find the link in the description.